I stood there in court trying not to cry as my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of the judge. "She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids," she said with a smirk. "Why should she get them?" I clenched my jaw and stayed quiet. I could feel my hands shaking. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The judge nodded slowly, as if he agreed. That moment felt like the air was being sucked out of my chest. All I could think about were my children, Luca and Aria. What would happen if they were taken from me and handed over to a man who only cared about control and appearances? I couldn't afford a lawyer like his. I couldn't afford anything, really. I was barely holding on. But I was here. I showed up. And I was doing everything I could for my kids. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into that quiet panic where your body is still but your thoughts are screaming, my 7-year-old son stood up. "Mom," he said loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The room froze. Everyone turned. Derek stiffened. His lawyer blinked like she'd just been slapped. Even the judge stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know what letter Luca meant. My heart pounded. He had never said anything about a letter, but I nodded. And as he walked toward the bench with that folded piece of paper in his small hand, everything changed. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat in court afraid to speak. I used to be confident. I had a job I loved, friends I laughed with, dreams that felt real. But when I married Derek, things changed slowly, and then all at once. He wasn't always cruel. In the beginning, he was charming, generous, and convincing. He told me I didn't need to work. He said I should stay home, raise the kids, and let him handle the money. "You've done enough," he said once. "You deserve rest." I didn't realize what I was giving up when I agreed. My independence, my voice, my safety net. I became invisible in my own life. After our daughter Aria was born, Derek started changing. He was always tired, always critical. Every dollar I spent was questioned. If I bought diapers without checking the sale price first, I got silence for hours. If I mentioned going back to work part-time, he'd remind me I didn't have a recent resume or say, "We don't need your help. We need you to be a good mom." By the time he left, I had nothing. No savings, no lawyer. No one in my corner except my kids. He cut off the joint account and moved in with someone new. He hired a lawyer right away. I couldn't even afford one. I went to the free legal clinic at the county courthouse and stood in line for 2 hours, holding a folder full of receipts and photos of my kids eating boxed macaroni on paper towels because we didn't have clean dishes. Our apartment was small. I worked 2 cleaning jobs under the table just to stay ahead of the rent. We didn't have cable or internet. I used a prepaid phone and hoped it wouldn't run out of minutes if the school needed to call me. I washed my kids' clothes by hand in the bathtub sometimes. The water heater barely worked, so I'd boil water on the stove and mix it in buckets. Luca never complained. Aria would hum little songs while I scrubbed her socks. I didn't tell anyone how bad it got, not even my mother. I was too ashamed. She'd warned me about Derek years ago, said he looked at people like they were transactions. But I was too in love back then to listen. When the court date came, I was terrified. Derek had filed for full custody, claimed I was unfit. He said I was unstable, poor, unable to provide a good life. His lawyer was brutal. They brought spreadsheets and photos of his beautiful home. They wore expensive suits and smiled like everything was already decided. I walked into the courtroom with a borrowed dress, a hand-me-down blazer, and a plastic folder with school records, attendance sheets, and a letter from our landlord confirming I'd never missed a payment. I knew it wasn't enough, but I had to try. For Luca. For Aria. That morning, Luca held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. "Is it going to be okay?" he asked. I smiled, but it felt thin. "Yes, baby, it's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. All I knew was that I loved my kids. I knew what it was like to go without and still put them first. I knew what it felt like to cry quietly in the bathroom after bedtime so they wouldn't see. I knew how hard I worked to make their little world feel safe when everything around us was shaking. Inside the courtroom, I sat straight and still. I watched Derek avoid eye contact. I listened as his lawyer listed off everything I didn't have: money, stable housing, reliable transportation. She said, Her son wears secondhand shoes with holes. Her daughter's teacher says she sometimes skips breakfast. This isn't neglect. This is poverty. And poverty isn't a crime, but it is a risk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, where were you when I was skipping dinner to make sure there was enough cereal left? Where were you when I was selling my wedding ring to buy coats for the winter? But I stayed silent. I had learned that in court, anger doesn't look like strength. It looks like instability. The judge nodded slowly as if every accusation made perfect sense. My heart sank, and just when I felt like I might not make it through the rest of the hearing, I felt that little tug on my sleeve. Luca, my sweet, brave boy. He looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I say something to the judge?" The courtroom felt colder the second Derek's lawyer began to speak. Carla Dean walked with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to win again. She stood tall, her voice loud and clipped, as she laid out her version of my life, one stripped of truth, one meant to humiliate. She has no stable employment. She receives inconsistent financial assistance. Her apartment is temporary housing. The children deserve better than a mother who can barely feed them. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could already picture his face. Blank. Relaxed. Watching this unfold like he had nothing to do with it. As if my financial ruin wasn't carefully orchestrated by him. He was the one who drained our joint account days before leaving. He was the one who refused to help with bills unless it made him look good in front of his parents. But none of that mattered in that room. The only thing the judge had in front of him were the spreadsheets and photos from Derek's side, pictures of his pristine house, the fully stocked fridge, the private school brochures. Carla flipped through her documents with a quiet rhythm, pulling out my bank statements. She held them up like they were dirty laundry. Your Honor, as you can see, my client provides a secure, consistent environment. The children have their own rooms, regular meals, a nanny. Meanwhile, Ms. Moreau has no documented income, no verified employer. She's behind on utilities and was issued a warning for late rent in February. This is not a safe or stable situation for two young children. I felt my face flush. She didn't mention the fact that I had picked up every job I could, often cleaning houses for cash because formal work wasn't an option with 2 kids and no childcare. She didn't mention that the rent notice was resolved within days, or that I'd sold everything valuable I had to keep food in the fridge. The judge didn't speak right away. He leaned back, looking down at the papers like they confirmed what he already believed, that I was trying. But trying wasn't enough. I wanted to defend myself, to explain everything, but I also knew how that would look. I had been warned not to interrupt, not to sound defensive, not to cry too much or appear too cold. So I sat there, silent, embarrassed, burning with shame and frustration. My fingers dug into the edge of my seat. I kept my eyes on the kids sitting quietly beside me. Arya was drawing on a piece of scratch paper with a dull crayon. Luca was watching Derek with narrowed eyes. Then Carla said the sentence that cut deeper than any insult she had thrown so far. Why should she get the children if she can't even afford to care for them? It echoed in my mind. Why should I get them? I held back the tears that were pressing behind my eyes. I knew my reality wasn't impressive on paper. I didn't have new clothes for them. I couldn't afford fancy lunches or ballet classes. But I was there every night. I was the one who brushed their hair, checked for monsters under their beds, and stayed up late hand-sewing patches into their jackets because I couldn't afford new ones. None of that mattered to the court. Only numbers did. Numbers I didn't have. The judge looked at me, his eyes heavy with doubt. He opened his mouth as if he was about to speak when I felt it, that small tug on my arm again. Luca. He whispered, "Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" At first, I didn't understand. What letter? I stared at him, confused, until he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. My stomach turned. I didn't know what it was, but something in Derek's posture shifted. He sat up straighter. Carla's eyes locked on the paper. "Luca, what is that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer me. He looked at the judge. "Can I give this to you?" he asked. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Bring it here." Luca stepped forward, small and steady, walked past the row of polished suits and wide eyes, and handed the letter to the judge with both hands. The room fell into a strange, heavy silence. I could see Derek start to sweat. Carla turned to him, whispering something quickly, her confidence faltering for the first time. The judge unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes move across the words. His expression changed slowly. Confusion, then realization, then something sharper. He looked up, directly at Derek. "Mr. Moreau," he said, "would you like to explain this?" The moment the judge spoke those words, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to shift. Derek's eyes widened. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Carla leaned toward him quickly, whispering again, but this time her voice carried a thread of urgency. Whatever was written on that piece of paper, it had shaken something loose. I leaned forward, my heart hammering, trying to read the judge's face. He held the letter in both hands and looked down at it again, his brow furrowed. Then he read it aloud. To Derek Moreau, from L. Becker, CPA. Subject, strategic financial shielding, divorce prep. Then he paused, glancing at the courtroom, then back at Derek. This is a financial strategy letter, dated 3 months before your divorce was filed. It details instructions for opening offshore accounts, transferring assets to shell LLCs, and minimizing reported income in order to influence custody and support proceedings. It includes the line, quote, "Keep primary custody if possible, but at minimum ensure she has little ground for legal appeal by appearing financially stable and morally sound." He stopped reading. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Every eye was now on Derek. Even Carla looked stunned. She turned her head slowly toward him, whispering something that sounded like, "Is this real?" I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen between disbelief and a kind of quiet rage that had no outlet. I had suspected things. I knew Derek was strategic, cold when it came to money, and ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. But to see it in writing, to hear a judge read it out loud in front of my children, was something I never imagined. The judge lowered the letter and placed it neatly on the bench in front of him. Then he looked back at Derek and said, "You were intentionally misleading this court. You've attempted to manipulate the outcome of these proceedings through financial deception. This letter is a direct attempt to use wealth and calculated dishonesty to deny your children access to their mother." Derek stood up abruptly. "That letter is old. It wasn't used. It's not even—" "Sit down, Mr. Moreau," the judge snapped. The authority in his voice startled everyone. Aria looked up from her drawing and reached for my hand. I wrapped my arm around her without looking away from the judge. He turned his attention back to me. "Miss Moreau, were you aware of this letter before today?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "This is the first time I've seen or heard of it." "And your son found it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes. He never mentioned it until now." Luca looked up at me then. "I thought it might help. I found it when I was looking for my tablet at Dad's house. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I didn't want us to lose." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then something softened in his expression. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned back to Carla Dean. "I will be reviewing this document in full and pausing this hearing for a formal inquiry into Mr. Moreau's financial conduct. In the meantime, primary custody will remain with Ms. Moreau, with temporary suspension of the defendant's parenting time until this matter is resolved." The words sank in, slowly. I heard them, but my body didn't react at first. It was like my brain needed a moment to make sure I hadn't imagined them. When they finally registered, I felt my knees tremble. I sat down hard, pulling both of my kids into my arms. Carla Dean stood silent, lips pressed together, arms folded tightly. She didn't argue. She couldn't. The damage was done. Derek didn't say another word. After the judge left the bench, the bailiff dismissed the court. I stayed seated, arms wrapped around my children like they were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. Luca leaned into me and whispered, "Did I mess up?" "No, baby," I said. "You saved us." He nodded once and didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I finally understood what kind of strength it takes for a child to carry something like that. And I realized something else. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like the truth had a real chance. I walked out of the courtroom that day holding my kids' hands, barely feeling the ground beneath my feet. My legs were moving, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying the judge's words in my head, trying to believe them. He had stopped the hearing. He had suspended Derek's parenting time. He had believed me, or at least he had finally seen the truth for himself. Outside, the air was cold. Luca let go of my hand to zip up Arya's coat. I watched him, feeling a rush of gratitude that I didn't have words for yet. How do you thank a child for something like that? Or standing up and doing what no adult in that courtroom had the courage to do? A few days later, the court ordered a formal investigation into Derek's financial activity. I met with a court-appointed investigator, a woman named Ms. Trent, who listened carefully, took notes, and never once looked at me like I was less than. She reviewed the letter, asked questions about our finances during the marriage, and requested permission to pull all relevant tax records and asset disclosures from both sides. I agreed without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Derek, on the other hand, did. Within a week, his house of cards started to fall. The investigator uncovered multiple accounts registered to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. She found wire transfers to overseas banks, cash transactions that were never disclosed, and tax inconsistencies that made it clear he had been hiding income for years. Every time I received an update, I felt something slowly rebuilding inside me. Trust in my own memory, confidence in my instincts, and belief that maybe, just maybe, justice could exist. For so long, I had been made to feel like I was imagining things. Derek had convinced everyone, including parts of me, that I was weak, paranoid, and incapable. But now, the facts were proving otherwise. The final hearing came faster than I expected. When I walked into the courtroom again, this time with legal representation provided by a domestic support advocacy group, I stood taller. I wasn't wearing borrowed clothes. I had found part-time work cleaning offices and had saved enough for a modest black dress and sturdy heels. Small things, but they felt like armor. Derek looked different, too. The confidence was gone. His new lawyer spoke in short, tight sentences. There were no smug glances, no fake smiles. The courtroom had shifted. The judge entered and began the session with a statement. This court has reviewed the financial investigation into Mr. Moreau and finds substantial evidence of willful non-disclosure, asset concealment, and manipulation of income to gain an advantage in these proceedings. This behavior directly contradicts the best interests of the children involved. He paused and looked down at me. Ms. Moreau, in light of these findings and your demonstrated commitment to your children's well-being under difficult circumstances, this court grants you full physical and legal custody of Luca and Arya. Mr. Moreau is ordered to pay backdated child support and will be subject to monitored visitation pending further review. I didn't cry right away. I think part of me was still bracing for the moment to be taken away, for someone to say there was a mistake or a change, but no one spoke. The judge signed the order. The gavel fell. It was real. Arya squealed quietly and hugged my waist. Luca squeezed my hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes were shining, steady and sure. That night, we had pancakes for dinner and danced to music on the radio. Nothing fancy, just us in our tiny kitchen, laughing until the sound filled every corner of the apartment. I sat on the floor afterward, holding them both on my lap. Arya was singing. Luca was drawing something on a notepad. When I looked down, I saw what he had written. A picture of a house with 3 stick figures. Above it, he'd written, "Home is where Mom is." That letter he found was more than just a piece of evidence. It was a lifeline, a doorway out of fear and into something that finally felt like peace. He could have hidden it, thrown it away, ignored it. But he didn't. Because even at 7 years old, my son knew right from wrong. And in a courtroom full of adults, he was the one brave enough to tell the truth. It's been 6 months since that day in court, but I still think about it often. Not just the moment the judge ruled in my favor, or the look on Derek's face, but the quiet strength it took to get there. The kind of strength that doesn't come from power or money, but from love. The kind that keeps going when everything else is gone. After the ruling, life didn't become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still budgeted every grocery trip down to the last dollar. I still picked up secondhand clothes and clipped coupons and said no to things other families might take for granted. But the fear was gone. The constant pressure, the feeling that someone was waiting to take everything away, that was over. Derek made a few attempts to regain control. He filed a motion to reduce his support payments, then tried to question the monitored visitation requirements. But the evidence was strong, and the court stood firm. He showed up to his scheduled visitations 3 times, then stopped trying. I didn't explain it to the kids in too much detail. I only told them what they needed to know. Their dad wasn't ready to be consistent, and they deserved people who showed up and stayed. They stopped asking after a while. Luca still talks about the letter sometimes. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, and he asked, "Was I in trouble for taking it?" I shook my head and looked him in the eye. "No, baby, you were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He nodded like he understood and leaned his head on my shoulder. That moment reminded me of how easily children carry burdens we don't even see. He had carried that piece of paper for weeks. He had waited for the right time to speak. He had chosen justice when no one asked him to. I started going to counseling. At first, it felt strange to talk about everything out loud, to hear myself admit just how bad it had been. But healing needs air. The more I spoke, the more I realized how much I had internalized. The shame, the guilt, the lie that being poor meant I was failing my children, that I had to prove my worth by looking okay instead of just being honest about how hard it was. My counselor helped me see something I hadn't before. I wasn't weak for struggling. I was strong for surviving, strong for keeping a roof over our heads, for showing up to court without a lawyer, for putting my children first every single day. One weekend, I found a part-time office job that offered benefits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I took it. I bought a laptop so I could take evening classes online and work toward a certification in bookkeeping. It was something I had always been good at, but never believed I could turn into a real career. The kids started doing better, too. Aria made a new best friend at her preschool, and her teacher said she'd become more talkative and confident. Luca joined the school's art club and had one of his drawings put up in the hallway. He chose a picture of a tree with roots, thick and deep. Underneath it, he wrote one word: growing. That's what we're doing now, growing. It doesn't always feel fast or easy, but it's steady. Every week we move a little further from fear and a little closer to peace. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so calm in court, how I didn't fall apart. The truth is, I almost did. But when you're a mother and your babies are on the line, you find a way to keep breathing, to keep standing. Not because it's easy, but because giving up was never an option. This story started in a courtroom, with me being accused of being too poor to be a good mother. It ended with the truth being spoken by the smallest voice in the room, a child who knew what love looked like and wasn't afraid to prove it. We didn't win because we had power or money or perfect appearances. We won because we had honesty, because we stayed kind, and because even when the odds were against us, we refused to break. There's one thing I've learned, it's this: justice doesn't always come easy, but it can still come. And sometimes, when it does, it arrives in the form of a folded letter in a little boy's hand, held with quiet courage, offered with love. That's the day everything changed, not just in court, not just legally, but in my heart. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything is against you, then please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment. Whether you're a parent, a survivor, or someone who just believes in truth and justice, your voice matters here. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about resilience, love, and what it means to fight for what matters most, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, one that sees people, not just their struggles. Thank you for being part of it.